The lively diner buzzed with the clatter of dishes, the murmur of conversations, and the sizzle of breakfast orders from the kitchen. Amid the organized chaos was Harper, a young waitress with a warm smile and a kind heart. She had a gift for making even the grumpiest regulars crack a smile and took pride in giving every customer her best, but this morning felt different. As Harper carried a tray of steaming pancakes past the window, something caught her eye. A small golden retriever puppy sitting near the curb. His fur was muddy, his ribs faintly visible, and his big, pleading eyes scanned the passers-by, searching for food or even a scrap of attention. Harper paused, her heart aching for the little creature. The puppy wasn't barking or begging, he just sat quietly, staring longingly at the plates of food being carried inside. A soft whine escaped his lips as he sniffed the air. "Poor thing," Harper whispered under her breath, her fingers tightening around the tray. She knew stray dogs weren't uncommon in the area, but something about this pup struck a chord deep within her. He looked abandoned yet hopeful. Setting the tray down, Harper turned to her manager, Mr. Connor. "Hey, do you think I could—" "No," he interrupted sharply, barely glancing up from his clipboard. "Don't even think about it, Harper. We're not feeding strays." Harper bit her lip, frustration bubbling inside her. The diner threw away food every day. What harm would one meal do? Moments later, as she passed by the counter, she made a decision. Harper grabbed a plate of scrambled eggs, bacon, and toast left uneaten by a customer. She wrapped it quickly, adding a small cup of water, and headed out the door. The puppy flinched as she approached, but didn't run. "Hey, little guy," Harper said softly, crouching down. "Are you hungry? Here, this is for you." The golden retriever tilted his head, hesitant but curious. Slowly, he sniffed the food before devouring it with a hunger that broke Harper's heart. She stroked his head gently, whispering, "You're not alone anymore." Unbeknownst to Harper, her act of kindness had been witnessed, and her life was about to change forever. Harper lingered outside the diner for a moment longer, watching the golden retriever wolf down the food. His tail wagged faintly, the first hint of joy she'd seen in the little creature. She couldn't help but smile. "You were starving, huh?" "Poor thing," she murmured softly, reaching out to gently scratch behind his ear. The puppy paused, looking up at her with grateful, soulful eyes that told stories of hardship and loneliness. "Harper!" The voice snapped her out of the moment like a whip crack. She turned quickly to see her manager, Mr. Connor, standing in the doorway with his arms crossed, his face twisted in disapproval. "What are you doing?" he barked, his tone loud enough to draw attention from inside the diner. Harper stood up, brushing her hands against her apron. "You were just feeding a stray dog," he interrupted, marching closer. "I told you not to do that. How many times do I have to remind you that this is a business, not a charity?" Harper's cheeks flushed with embarrassment as she glanced over at the customers who were now peering through the window, whispering among themselves. "Mr. Connor, it was just a plate of leftover food," she argued, trying to keep her voice calm. "We throw so much away every day, and this little guy clearly needed it." Mr. Connor shook his head, his expression cold. "And what happens when he comes back tomorrow? And the next day? We'll have strays all over the place. It's bad for business. If the health inspector sees this, we could get fined." Harper's heart sank as she glanced at the puppy, who was now sitting quietly, his ears drooping as if he could sense the tension. "But no buts," Connor snapped. "You're fired, Harper. You can collect your things and go." The words hit her like a punch to the stomach. "Fired," she repeated, stunned. "For feeding a dog?" "Yes," he said firmly. "For disobeying my orders and embarrassing this establishment?" Connor turned on his heel, heading back inside. "And don't let me catch you here again." Harper stood frozen, her mind reeling. Customers stared at her through the glass, some sympathetic, others indifferent. Fired. Just like that. Tears stung her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Instead, she crouched back down beside the puppy, forcing a smile for his sake. "It's okay, buddy," she whispered. "It's not your fault." The golden retriever leaned against her as if offering comfort, and Harper ran her hand through his soft, matted fur. "What do I do now?" she murmured, mostly to herself. She had bills to pay, rent due at the end of the month, and now no job to rely on, all for an act of kindness that felt so small yet so significant. The puppy licked her hand softly, wagging his tail as if trying to reassure her. Despite everything, Harper felt a flicker of hope, like the little dog was telling her that things would somehow be okay. Just then, the soft hum of an approaching car caught her attention. A sleek black SUV pulled up in front of the diner, the engine purring as it came to a stop. Harper frowned, shielding her eyes against the glare of the afternoon sun. The driver's side door opened, and a man stepped out, a tall figure in a tailored suit, his polished shoes clicking against the pavement. "Excuse me, miss," the man said, his voice calm and authoritative as he approached. Harper straightened up, the puppy pressing against her leg for comfort. "Yes? Are you the one who fed this dog?" Harper hesitated, unsure how to respond. "Yes, I am," she admitted carefully. "Why?" The man studied her for a moment, his sharp gaze softening as it flicked to the puppy at her feet. Then, much to her surprise, he smiled. "I've been looking for this dog." Harper blinked. "You have?" "Yes," he said. "This little one's been missing for days. He belongs to someone very important to me." The puppy looked up at the man, tilting his head as if trying to recognize him. Then, to Harper's astonishment, the man crouched down and held out his hand. "Come here, boy," he said softly. The golden retriever hesitated, glancing between Harper and the man as though torn. Finally, he stepped forward cautiously, sniffing the man's hand before nuzzling it gently. The man's smile widened. "There you are," he murmured, scratching behind the dog's ear. "I've been so worried about you." Harper couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness. "So he's yours?" The man stood up, shaking his head. "Not mine. My daughter's. This dog, Scout, is her best friend. She's been heartbroken since he disappeared." He turned to Harper, his expression suddenly serious. "You have no idea how much this means to us." Harper blinked in surprise. "I'm just glad he's safe." The man reached into his pocket, pulling out a sleek leather wallet. "You've done something incredible today," he said, handing her a business card. "I'd like to offer you something in return. Come by this address tomorrow morning. I think I have an opportunity you'll be interested in." Harper stared at the card, speechless. The address was for a prominent local organization she had only ever heard about on the news. I don't know what to say," she stammered. "Say yes," the man said with a knowing smile. "Good people deserve good things." With that, he led Scout to the SUV and opened the door. The golden retriever paused, looking back at Harper with those same soulful eyes. She waved softly. "Goodbye, buddy. Take care of yourself." The puppy barked once, a happy, grateful sound, as if promising that this wasn't really goodbye. As the SUV drove off, Harper stood there for a long moment, with the business card in her hand. Fired or not, she couldn't shake the feeling that something incredible had just begun. The next morning, Harper stood in front of the address printed on the business card, her heart pounding in her chest as she looked up at the sleek, modern building. The sign on the door read, "Evergreen Animal Rescue Foundation," a name she recognized instantly. It was one of the most prominent organizations in the city, known for rescuing and rehabilitating animals, and spearheaded by the influential Dawson family. "Am I really supposed to be here?" Harper whispered to herself, clutching the card tightly. She thought back to yesterday, the dog, the stranger, the sudden offer. It felt surreal. She took a deep breath, gathered her courage, and stepped inside. The reception area was clean and bright, with photos of rescued animals lining the walls. A friendly receptionist smiled up at her. "Good morning. Can I help you?" Yes," Harper said, her voice trembling slightly. "I'm Harper. I was invited here by—" Before she could finish, a voice called out, "Ah, Harper, you came." Harper turned to see the man from yesterday, now dressed more casually but still exuding authority. He approached with a warm smile. "I'm glad you made it." Harper smiled faintly. "Thank you. I wasn't sure what to expect." "Come with me," the man said, gesturing toward a hallway. "I owe you a proper introduction. My name is Andrew Dawson. My family runs this foundation. Yesterday you helped save more than just a dog. You gave a little girl her happiness back." Harper followed him, her curiosity growing. "The golden retriever, Scout, he really means that much to her?" Andrew nodded, his expression softening. "My daughter Lily has been struggling since her mother passed away last year. Scout is more than just a pet. He's her comfort, her best friend. When he ran off after getting scared during a thunderstorm, we searched everywhere. Lily hasn't slept well in days. But last night, when we brought Scout home, I saw her smile for the first time in weeks." Harper's heart swelled. The thought that her small act of kindness had made such an impact was overwhelming. "I'm so glad Scout is back where he belongs." Andrew stopped in front of a large window overlooking a spacious play area filled with happy bouncing dogs. "Harper, people like you are rare. Most would have ignored a stray. You stepped in when no one else did." He turned to face her. "Our foundation could use someone like you, someone with heart. I want to offer you a job here at Evergreen." Harper froze. "A job?" "Yes," Andrew replied. "We rescue animals, rehabilitate them, and find them loving homes. It's hard work, but it's meaningful. And with your compassion, I think you'd be perfect for it." Harper was speechless. The last 24 hours had felt like a whirlwind. Fired for feeding a stray dog one day, and now being offered a position at a respected animal rescue. "I don't know what to say," she admitted. "Say yes," Andrew said with a smile. "You'll start part-time, and if it's a good fit, we'll make it full-time. Sounds fair?" Harper hesitated, her mind racing. The thought of working with animals, of being part of something bigger, made her heart flutter with excitement. "Yes," she said finally, a grin spreading across her face. "I'd love that." Andrew clapped his hands together. "Great. Let me give you a quick tour." Over the next few hours, Harper was introduced to the world of animal rescue. Andrew walked her through the different parts of the facility: the medical wing, where injured animals were treated; the adoption center, where families came to meet their new furry companions; and the outdoor play area, where dogs like Scout could run freely. "This place is incredible," Harper said, watching a group of puppies tumble around playfully. "It is," Andrew agreed, his voice proud. "But it's not without challenges. Many of these animals come to us scared, abused, or abandoned. It takes time, patience, and a lot of love to help them trust again." Harper looked out at the animals, her mind flashing back to Scout's weary, soulful eyes the day before. "I think I can do that," she said softly. "I know you can," Andrew replied. As the day wound down, Harper was helping clean out one of the kennels when she felt a tug on her pant leg. She turned to see a scruffy little terrier mix staring up at her, his tail wagging furiously. She laughed, crouching down to scratch behind his ears. "Well, aren't you adorable?" "That's Tucker," said one of the volunteers passing by. "He's been here a while. Sweet little guy, but he's nervous around people." "Not anymore, apparently," Harper replied as Tucker licked her hand. The connection she felt with the animals was instant and natural, and for the first time in weeks, she felt a spark of joy. That evening, as Harper left the foundation, she found herself replaying the day's events over and over in her mind. Yesterday she had been humiliated, fired, and unsure of her future. Today she was walking home with a renewed sense of purpose and a job that already felt right. Her phone buzzed, pulling her out of her thoughts. It was a message from an unknown number. "Thank you for taking care of Scout. My dad says you're working at the rescue now, and I just wanted to say you're amazing." Lily Harper smiled as she read the text. A single moment of kindness had set off a chain of events she never could have predicted. "Maybe getting fired wasn't the worst thing to happen," she murmured, her steps feeling lighter than they had in a long time. In the distance, she could already hear the faint barks and yips of dogs, as if calling her back to where she truly belonged. The days at the Evergreen Animal Rescue Foundation quickly became a source of fulfillment for Harper. Each morning she arrived early, greeted by the chorus of barking dogs and the gentle hum of caretakers starting their routines. Her connection with the animals grew deeper with every day, especially with Tucker, the scruffy terrier mix who had instantly claimed a place in her heart. It wasn't just the dogs, though. The people at the foundation were a team, passionate, kind, and supportive. Harper hadn't felt this sense of belonging in a long time. Andrew had been right. This work was hard, but it was also meaningful. One afternoon, about a week into her new job, Harper was sitting on the floor of the play area, laughing as Tucker tugged on a frayed rope toy, when Andrew approached her with a thoughtful expression. "Harper, can I talk to you for a second?" She looked up, her smile fading slightly at the seriousness in his voice. "Of course." Andrew motioned for her to follow him inside, leading her to his office. The walls were lined with photos of successful adoptions and stories of rehabilitated animals, each picture a testament to the foundation's work. Andrew sat behind his desk, gesturing for Harper to take a seat. "I wanted to check in on you," he began, his tone gentle. "You've been doing incredible work here, Harper. The way you connect with the animals, it's something special." Harper's face warmed with pride. "Thank you. I've never felt more at home." Andrew smiled faintly but hesitated before continuing. "There's something I need to share with you, though, something about your old boss." Harper froze. "Mr. Grady?" "Yes," Andrew said, leaning forward, his voice dropping slightly. "It's come to my attention that what happened at the diner you're firing may not have been about the food you gave to Scout." Harper blinked, confusion clouding her features. "What do you mean?" Andrew sighed. Andrew motioned for her to follow him inside, leading her to his office. The walls were lined with photos of successful adoptions and stories of rehabilitated animals, each picture a testament to the foundation's work. Andrew sat behind his desk, gesturing for Harper to take a seat. "I wanted to check in on you," he began, his tone gentle. "You've been doing incredible work here, Harper. The way you connect with the animals, it's something special." Harper's face warmed with pride. "Thank you. I've never felt more at home." Andrew smiled faintly but hesitated before continuing. "There's something I need to share with you, though, something about your old boss." Harper froze. "Mr. Grady?" "Yes," Andrew said, leaning forward, his voice dropping slightly. "It's come to my attention that what happened at the diner you're firing may not have been about the food you gave to Scout." Harper blinked, confusion clouding her features. "What do you mean?" Andrew sighed. "Someone anonymously reported Mr. Grady to animal control a few months ago. Apparently, he's been mistreating animals near his diner, strays that wander too close or linger around for food. The report claimed he'd been scaring them off aggressively, or worse." Harper felt her stomach drop. "You're saying he's been hurting them?" Andrew nodded grimly. "The investigation didn't go very far at the time because there wasn't enough evidence. But your story caught my attention, and I started digging around. It seems like you feeding Scout was the final straw for Mr. Grady. He didn't want the dog hanging around his diner, and your kindness threatened the way he handled the situation." Harper sat back in shock. She had known Mr. Grady could be cold, but to think he would go as far as mistreating animals left her speechless. "I can't believe this," she murmured. "He fired me because I did the right thing, because I showed kindness to a dog?" Someone anonymously reported Mr. Grady to animal control a few months ago. Apparently, he's been mistreating animals near his diner, strays that wander too close or linger around for food. The report claimed he'd been scaring them off aggressively, or worse. Harper felt her stomach drop. "You're saying he's been hurting them?" Andrew nodded grimly. "The investigation didn't go very far at the time because there wasn't enough evidence. But your story caught my attention, and I started digging around. It seems like you feeding Scout was the final straw for Mr. Grady. He didn't want the dog hanging around his diner, and your kindness threatened the way he handled the situation." Harper sat back in shock. She had known Mr. Grady could be cold, but to think he would go as far as mistreating animals left her speechless. "I can't believe this," she murmured. "He fired me because I did the right thing? Because I showed kindness to a dog?" "That's exactly why we need people like you, Harper," Andrew said firmly. "When I saw how you cared for Scout, I realized you were someone who wouldn't turn a blind eye to cruelty." Harper's mind raced. The thought of Mr. Grady mistreating other strays, animals who were helpless and alone, made her blood boil. "Is there anything we can do?" she asked, her voice shaking with determination. Andrew smiled faintly, as though he had been waiting for her to ask. "Actually, yes. I've been working on a partnership with Animal Control to address cases like this, but we need more evidence to take action." Harper leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "Tell me what I can do to help." That evening, Harper couldn't stop thinking about Mr. Grady. Memories of her time at the diner resurfaced. The stray cat she had sometimes seen lurking in the alley, the way Grady would yell and chase them off with a broom. At the time, she hadn't thought much of it, but now it all made sense. Her resolve hardened as she walked home, Tucker trotting happily beside her on a leash. Andrew had allowed her to bring him home as a foster, a temporary arrangement that already felt permanent. "You're coming with me tomorrow," she murmured to Tucker, scratching behind his ears. "We're going to make sure no other animal has to suffer because of him." The next morning, Harper arrived at the diner just as the early shift began. She stayed across the street, hidden from view, watching as Grady barked orders at his staff. Her heart pounded in her chest as she noticed something in the alley, a small figure darting behind a dumpster. It was a kitten, scrawny and dirty, clearly searching for scraps. Harper's stomach twisted. She watched as Grady stepped outside, spotted the kitten, and grabbed a broom. "Get out of here!" he shouted, swinging the broom aggressively. The kitten hisses and bolted, disappearing into a narrow gap between buildings. Her resolve hardened as she walked home, Tucker trotting happily beside her on a leash. Andrew had allowed her to bring him home as a foster, a temporary arrangement that already felt permanent. "You're coming with me tomorrow," she murmured to Tucker, scratching behind his ears. "We're going to make sure no other animal has to suffer because of him." The next morning, Harper arrived at the diner just as the early shift began. She stayed across the street, hidden from view, watching as Grady barked orders at his staff. Her heart pounded in her chest as she noticed something in the alley, a small figure darting behind a dumpster. It was a kitten, scrawny and dirty, clearly searching for scraps. Harper's stomach twisted. She watched as Grady stepped outside, spotted the kitten, and grabbed a broom. "Get out of here!" he shouted, swinging the broom aggressively. The kitten hisses and bolted, disappearing into a narrow gap between buildings. Harper clenched her fists. "That's enough," she muttered. She pulled out her phone, capturing the scene on video. Over the next few days, Harper continued to gather evidence. With the help of a few evergreen volunteers, she documented Grady's behavior toward stray animals. His yelling, his threats, and even attempts to scare them off with water hoses. At the foundation, Andrew reviewed the footage. "This is more than enough to reopen the investigation," he said, his voice tight with anger. "We'll work with Animal Control to put an end to this." Harper nodded, her heart racing. It's time he's held accountable. As she sat with Tucker that night, Harper felt a mix of emotions: anger at the injustice, pride in her actions, and hope for what was to come. For the first time, she realized that getting fired from the diner hadn't been a setback. It had been the start of something much bigger, and she wasn't going to stop until every stray animal, like Scout and Tucker, was safe. Harper clenched her fists. "That's enough," she muttered. She pulled out her phone, capturing the scene on video. Over the next few days, Harper continued to gather evidence. With the help of a few evergreen volunteers, she documented Grady's behavior toward stray animals. His yelling, his threats, and even attempts to scare them off with water hoses. At the foundation, Andrew reviewed the footage. "This is more than enough to reopen the investigation," he said, his voice tight with anger. "We'll work with animal control to put an end to this." Harper nodded, her heart racing. It's time he's held accountable. As she sat with Tucker that night, Harper felt a mix of emotions: anger at the injustice, pride in her actions, and hope for what was to come. For the first time, she realized that getting fired from the diner hadn't been a setback. It had been the start of something much bigger, and she wasn't going to stop until every stray animal, like Scout and Tucker, was safe. Harper barely slept that night. The images of Mr. Grady swinging his broom and shouting at helpless animals replayed in her mind like a broken record. It was infuriating to know that this kind of cruelty had been happening right under her nose for so long, and that no one had stopped him. But now, things were different. Now, Harper had a mission. The following morning, she arrived at the Evergreen Animal Rescue Foundation with a new determination burning in her chest. Andrew was already in his office, sifting through paperwork and sipping on his coffee. Harper knocked on the open door. "Good morning," she said, her voice steady but purposeful. Andrew looked up, smiling faintly. "Good morning, Harper. You look like you're on a mission today." "I am," Harper said, stepping inside and setting her bag on the chair. "What's next? What do we do about Grady?" Andrew leaned back in his chair, studying her for a moment. "The footage you collected is compelling, and animal control is reviewing it. But we need to be prepared. Cases like this take time, and Grady's not the kind of man to go quietly." Harper frowned. "So what do we do in the meantime? We can't let more animals suffer while the process drags on." Andrew nodded, sharing her frustration. "You're right. While animal control does their part, we can step up our outreach. If Grady is driving animals away from his diner, chances are they're wandering into the surrounding areas. We need to find them, bring them here, and make sure they're safe." Harper's shoulders relaxed slightly. "I can do that. I want to help." Andrew grinned. "I knew you would. I'll gather a team of volunteers and we'll start canvassing the area this afternoon. You'll take the lead." The words made Harper pause. "Me? Lead? Why not you?" Andrew shrugged. "You've proven yourself over and over, Harper. You care, and the animals trust you. That's what matters. The footage you collected is compelling, and animal control is reviewing it. But we need to be prepared. Cases like this take time, and Grady's not the kind of man to go quietly." Harper frowned. "So what do we do in the meantime? We can't let more animals suffer while the process drags on." Andrew nodded, sharing her frustration. "You're right. While animal control does their part, we can step up our outreach. If Grady is driving animals away from his diner, chances are they're wandering into the surrounding areas. We need to find them, bring them here, and make sure they're safe." Harper's shoulders relaxed slightly. "I can do that. I want to help." Andrew grinned. "I knew you would. I'll gather a team of volunteers and we'll start canvassing the area this afternoon. You'll take the lead." The words made Harper pause. "Me? Lead? Why not you?" Andrew shrugged. "You've proven yourself over and over, Harper. You care, and the animals trust you. That's what matters." Harper hesitated for only a moment before nodding. "Okay, I'll do it." That afternoon, Harper and a small team of Evergreen volunteers armed with crates, blankets, and treats set out into the neighborhood surrounding the diner. It was a crisp autumn day, and Harper couldn't help but notice how quiet the streets were compared to the bustling diner she had once called her workplace. Tucker trotted happily at her side, his leash loose in her hand. Harper had insisted on bringing him along, not just for company, but because she trusted his nose. He was a scrappy dog who had likely lived a similar life to the strays they were looking for. The first hour was slow. Harper scanned alleyways, checked behind dumpsters, and approached any suspicious corners where a hungry animal might hide. A few cats darted out of sight before the volunteers could get close, but they left bowls of food behind, hoping to draw them back later. Finally, Harper spotted something near a crumbling brick wall behind an abandoned store. She saw a small movement, just a flicker, but enough to make her pause. She crouched low, whispering to Tucker, "Do you see that, buddy?" Tucker sniffed the air, his tail wagging cautiously. As Harper crept forward, there, hidden among the weeds and debris, was a tiny, trembling puppy. Its fur was matted and dirty, and its ribs were visible beneath its thin coat. "Oh, sweetheart," Harper whispered, her heart breaking. She set Tucker's leash down lightly. He stayed put, watching, and slowly extended her hand. "It's okay, you're safe now." The puppy flinched, its wide, frightened eyes locking onto hers. Harper didn't move any closer. Instead, she waited, keeping her voice soft and soothing. "You're okay. I'm not going to hurt you. Look, Tucker's here too." As if on cue, Tucker lay down on the ground, resting his chin on his paws and wagging his tail softly. The small puppy looked at him, curious but still afraid. After a few moments, it took a cautious step forward. "That's it," Harper encouraged. "You're doing great." She reached into her bag and pulled out a piece of soft bread she had brought for exactly this reason. The puppy sniffed the air, tempted by the food. With a tiny whimper, it crept closer, finally taking the bread from Harper's hand. "There we go," Harper whispered, a smile breaking across her face. Gently, she reached out and stroked the puppy's back, feeling its trembling muscles start to relax. She scooped it up carefully and cradled it against her chest. The puppy buried its face in her sweater, too weak to struggle. "You're safe now," she murmured. "I promise." By the end of the day, Harper and her team had rescued 3 stray animals, 2 cats, and the trembling puppy she had found. Back at the foundation, the vet examined each one, treating their injuries and ensuring they were fed and warm. Harper stayed late into the evening, sitting beside the puppy's crate as it slept soundly for the first time in who knows how long. Tucker lay nearby, watching over them both. Andrew approached quietly, a proud smile on his face. "Good work today, Harper. You saved lives." Harper looked up, brushing her hair back. "It feels right," she admitted. "Like I'm doing what I'm supposed to do." "You are," Andrew replied. He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "This is just the beginning, Harper." Harper nodded, her heart full but heavy. Mr. Grady was still out there, and until the investigation stopped him, there would be more animals like the ones they had saved today. But for now, Harper looked at the sleeping puppy and smiled. "One at a time," she whispered. "We'll save them all." Over the next few days, Harper threw herself into her work at the Evergreen Animal Rescue Foundation. The puppies, kittens, and strays they had saved during their first search began to recover, their weak bodies responding to food, care, and warmth. The trembling puppy Harper had found in the weeds, now named Scout, quickly became the center of her attention. He was small, shy, and still skittish around sudden noises, but he wagged his tail whenever Harper approached, inching closer to trusting humans again. But as Harper grew closer to Scout and the other animals, the specter of Mr. Grady loomed larger than ever. News of Grady's harsh treatment of animals had begun to spread through whispers in the community. Although there were no official actions taken against him yet, it was enough to put the diner under a cloud of suspicion. Customers dwindled, and Grady's frustration was becoming impossible to ignore. One afternoon, Harper and Andrew sat in his office, reviewing adoption applications, when the phone rang sharply. Andrew picked it up, his expression tightening almost immediately. "Evergreen Foundation, Andrew speaking." "Yes, this is our organization." "What do you mean, trespassing?" Harper froze, her stomach sinking. She could hear the harsh, growling voice on the other end of the line. "I don't know what you're talking about, Mr. Grady," Andrew replied firmly. "We operate within the law, and any footage of the animals—" The voice interrupted him, growing louder. Harper could almost imagine Grady's face, red with anger, jaw clenched, eyes cold as stone. Andrew straightened in his chair. "If you believe you have a claim, I suggest you take it up with animal control. Good day, Mr. Grady." He slammed the phone down and exhaled heavily, pinching the bridge of his nose. "What did he say?" Harper asked, already knowing the answer. Andrew's voice was low and calm, though his frustration simmered beneath the surface. "Grady's accusing us of trespassing on his property and harassing his business. He says we've been encouraging customers to avoid his diner." Harper frowned. "That's ridiculous. We haven't said a word to anyone about him." Andrew replied, "But it's not just words anymore. He's angry, and that makes him unpredictable." Harper sat back, chewing her bottom lip. "So what do we do?" Andrew looked at her with measured calm. "We keep doing what we're doing, but we're careful. We don't want to give Grady any ammunition. He's counting on us losing our cool." Harper nodded, though a flicker of anxiety ran through her. Grady wasn't just lashing out, he was escalating. Later that evening, as Harper finished her shift and prepared to head home, Andrew caught up to her by the shelter's front door. Tucker wagged his tail as he followed her, ready for their evening walk. "Harper," Andrew said, his tone quieter than usual, "I've arranged for security cameras to be installed around the foundation tomorrow." Harper blinked, surprised. "You think it's necessary?" "I don't want to take any chances," Andrew replied. "Grady's temper is only going to get worse, and I don't want him coming anywhere near this place. You've done amazing work here, Harper. I just want to make sure you're safe." The word struck a chord in Harper. No one had ever looked out for her like that before. She smiled faintly, her voice soft. "Thanks, Andrew. I'll be careful." He nodded, then glanced at Tucker, who barked cheerfully at his side. "And keep Tucker close. He's a good watchdog." As Harper walked home through the darkening streets, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every shadow seemed longer, every noise sharper. Tucker trotted protectively beside her, his ears perked in alert. When they finally reached her small apartment, Harper double-checked the locks on her doors and windows before collapsing onto the couch. Tucker hopped up beside her, resting his head on her lap as if sensing her unease. "It's fine," Harper whispered, scratching his ears. "We're fine." But even as she said it, she couldn't shake the memory of Mr. Grady's voice on the phone. Angry, vindictive, and far from finished. The next morning, Harper arrived at the shelter early, eager to distract herself by spending time with Scout and the other animals. As she stepped through the front doors, her eyes widened in shock. The shelter's walls had been vandalized. Thick streaks of black spray paint marred the entrance, with angry words scrawled across the brick, "Leave our town alone." Harper's heart dropped, and her hand shook as she fumbled for her phone to call Andrew. Within minutes, he arrived alongside a few volunteers, all of them staring in disbelief at the graffiti. "This has to be Grady," Andrew said, clenching his fists, "or someone connected to him." Harper nodded numbly, her stomach turning. "What do we do now?" "We clean it up," Andrew replied firmly. "And we don't let this stop us, Harper. This is what happens when you fight for something that matters. People who are in the wrong will fight back." "But the animals," Harper began, her voice cracking. Andrew cut her off gently. "The animals need us. They need you, Harper, and we're not going to let anyone scare us away." Harper took a deep breath, feeling the weight of Andrew's words settle in her chest. She looked back at the shelter, at the frightened animals who depended on them for safety and love. Scout was counting on her. Tucker was counting on her. With new resolve, Harper nodded. "Let's clean up." As the team began scrubbing the graffiti away, Harper caught sight of Scout watching her through the window of his kennel. His tiny tail wagged faintly as if cheering her on. "We're not giving up," Harper whispered to him, more to herself than anyone else. "Not on you, not on any of you." Over the next week, Harper and the team worked tirelessly to repair the shelter's image, both literally and figuratively. The graffiti was cleaned off the walls. The security cameras were installed, and extra volunteers joined the effort to help care for the animals. The incident had shaken everyone, but it also sparked a wave of community support. People who had heard about the vandalism began showing up with donations of food, blankets, and supplies. Local news outlets covered the story, casting a spotlight on the shelter's mission and the struggles they faced. "Looks like we're getting through to people," Andrew said one afternoon, standing next to Harper as they sorted donations. "Sometimes it takes a crisis to wake people up." Harper smiled faintly, though her mind was elsewhere. Ever since the incident, she'd been glancing over her shoulder more often, walking Tucker a little closer, and worrying about what Grady might try next. He hadn't made another move, but she knew his silence didn't mean he was done. It was during one of these moments, standing in Scout's kennel, watching the puppy nuzzle a new blanket, that Harper's phone buzzed with an unexpected message. "Anonymous number, you're making a big mistake. Leave now before it's too late." Her heart skipped a beat. She stared at the screen, her thumb hovering over the reply button before she locked the phone. Taking a deep breath, she glanced down at Scout, who peered up at her with innocent brown eyes. "It's okay, Scout," she whispered, though her voice shook slightly. "We're safe here." But were they? Later that evening, Andrew called an emergency team meeting to address the rising tension. Harper sat in the circle of chairs alongside other volunteers, her nerves frayed as she waited for him to speak. "All right, everyone," Andrew began, his tone calm but serious. "I won't sugarcoat this. What we're doing here is making waves, and some people don't like it. We've all heard the rumors about Grady and his treatment of animals. What we're seeing now is his way of fighting back, trying to scare us off. But we haven't done anything wrong." One of the volunteers chimed in, frustration evident in her voice. "That's exactly why we can't back down," Andrew said firmly. "If we stop now, we're letting him win. The animals, Scout, Tucker, all of them, they don't have anyone else. This shelter is their lifeline." Harper nodded, her resolve hardening. "What about the threats?" she asked quietly. Andrew's gaze softened as he turned toward her. "We're reporting everything to the police, Harper. You're not alone in this. If anyone so much as sets foot near you or the shelter, we'll take action." The words were meant to reassure her, but Harper couldn't shake the weight of the anonymous message. Grady was trying to intimidate her specifically, and a part of her wondered if it was her fault for standing up to him that day in the diner. After the meeting, as the volunteers dispersed, Andrew approached Harper and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "Are you okay?" Harper forced a smile. "I'm fine, just a little rattled." "I get it," Andrew said softly. "But remember this. Grady's anger isn't about you. It's about what we represent. He's scared because he knows being exposed." Harper nodded, appreciating the words even if they didn't fully ease her worry. "Thanks, Andrew. Take the night off," he added. "Spend time with Tucker. You've been running yourself ragged here." She considered arguing, but decided against it. Andrew was right. She needed a moment to clear her head. That evening, Harper took Tucker on a long walk through the quiet streets of her neighborhood. The sun had dipped below the horizon, and the faint glow of street lights bathed the sidewalks in soft yellow light. Tucker trotted happily beside her, his tail wagging and ears perked as they walked. "Maybe Andrew's right," Harper said aloud, scratching behind Tucker's ears. "Maybe Grady's just bluffing, trying to scare us." Tucker barked in response, as if agreeing with her. Harper chuckled faintly, the first genuine smile she'd had all day. For a moment she allowed herself to enjoy the cool night air, the soft rustling of leaves, and Tucker's comforting presence. But as they rounded the corner back toward her apartment, Harper froze. A dark car sat parked across the street. Its engine was off, but she could see the faint glow of someone sitting in the driver's seat. Her heart began to pound. "Come on, Tucker," she whispered, gripping the leash tightly. She quickened her pace, her eyes darting back toward the car as she crossed the street. The figure didn't move, but Harper could feel the weight of their gaze following her. When she reached her apartment door, her hands trembled as she unlocked it. Tucker barked once, standing alert as if sensing her unease. "Inside, buddy," she whispered, pulling him through the door and locking it behind her. Through the peephole, she watched the car for several minutes. Finally, the engine rumbled to life, and it pulled away into the night. Harper slumped against the door, her breath shaky. "It's fine," she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. "It's fine. They're just trying to scare me." Tucker sat beside her, resting his head on her knee. She stroked his fur, her thoughts racing. Grady's threats were no longer idle words. He was watching her, and he wanted her to know it. But as Harper looked down at Tucker and thought of Scout and all the other animals depending on her, a spark of defiance flickered in her chest. "You're not going to win, Grady," she murmured. "I promise you that." The days that followed were a blur of vigilance and quiet defiance. Harper refused to let fear dictate her actions. Every morning she showed up at the shelter with Tucker by her side, ready to care for the animals and ensure everything ran smoothly. She pretended not to notice the unfamiliar cars that occasionally drove slowly past the shelter or the menacing notes that appeared under the door. Andrew had reported everything to the police, but there was little they could do without concrete proof of Grady's involvement. One afternoon, Harper was kneeling beside Scout's pen, the golden retriever pup gnawing playfully on her shoelaces, when a voice startled her. "Well, aren't you just a bleeding heart?" Harper's head snapped up. Grady stood just inside the shelter entrance, a cruel smirk twisting his features. His presence cast an icy shadow over the otherwise warm and cheerful room. Tucker growled low from where he lay near Harper, his hackles raised. "You can't be in here," Harper said sharply, rising to her feet. "Leave." Grady ignored her, stepping forward and casting a condescending look around the shelter. "This dump is still open, huh? I'm surprised. Figured you'd have given up by now." "We're doing just fine," Harper shot back, though her heart raced. "You have no right to be here. Get out before I call the police." Grady's smirk faltered, but his eyes narrowed with barely veiled anger. "Police? They won't do a thing. You don't know what you're up against, sweetheart." "I know exactly what I'm up against," Harper said, her voice steady even as she clenched her fists. "A bully who's afraid of being exposed." Grady's face darkened, and for a moment, Harper wondered if he'd lash out. Tucker stood protectively in front of her, his growl growing louder. Finally, Grady sneered and stepped back toward the door. "Have it your way," he muttered. "But don't say I didn't warn you." Harper watched him leave, the tension in her chest loosening only once the door closed behind him. She knelt and rubbed Tucker's head. "Good boy," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You're my brave boy." Scout, oblivious to the exchange, let out a happy bark, pulling her focus back to the moment. Harper shook off her fear. Grady's intimidation tactics were growing bolder, but she refused to let him win. That evening, Harper and Andrew sat at a corner table in a small cafe, going over plans for the shelter's upcoming fundraising event. The community had rallied in support of them after the vandalism, and Andrew had suggested hosting a Rescue Day event to raise awareness and funds. "We'll set up adoption booths outside. Invite families to come meet the animals," Andrew explained, tapping his pen against a flyer they were designing. "Maybe even partner with local businesses to sponsor some of the animals' care. It'll show people we're not going anywhere." Harper nodded, feeling a spark of hope. "I like it. The more people we get involved, the harder it'll be for Grady to keep pushing us around." Andrew's expression grew serious. "Speaking of Grady, I don't like what's happening, Harper. He's escalating, the vandalism, the threats, and him showing up today. It's not a good sign." Harper frowned. "I know, but we can't back down if we stop now. He's made threats, he's damaged property, and he's attempted to intimidate our team. But I'm standing here today to say we will not stop until his operation is shut down and every animal he's harmed is safe. These dogs can't speak for themselves, but we can speak for them." The crowd erupted in applause, and the reporters began firing questions. "What evidence do you have?" one asked. Harper held up a folder. Photos of the conditions, veterinarian reports on rescued dogs, and statements from witnesses. "Has he threatened you directly?" another reporter pushed. "Yes," Harper said, her voice unwavering. "But we refuse to back down." Andrew stepped up beside her, addressing the crowd. "Grady Walker is hidden in the shadows for too long. We're asking the community, law enforcement, and animal rights organizations to step in and ensure justice is served. No animal deserves to suffer like this." As the press conference ended, volunteers began handing out flyers with information about the illegal kennel. Support poured in from all directions. Neighbors offered to help secure the shelter, businesses pledged donations, and rescue groups shared Grady's name across every platform. Back at the shelter, Harper sat at her desk answering phone calls and emails from people wanting to help. Andrew walked in, holding his phone with an excited expression. "Harper, you're not going to believe this," he said. "A major news station picked up the story. It's airing tonight." Harper's eyes widened. "That's huge! If we can get enough attention, maybe the police will act faster." Andrew grinned. "They won't have a choice. The pressure will be too strong." But their victory was short-lived. That evening, as the sun began to set, a loud crash echoed through the shelter grounds. Harper and Andrew rushed outside to find one of the kennel doors broken open and 2 dogs missing. "Grady," Harper whispered, her heart sinking. He came back. Andrew growled, his fists clenched. He took the dogs as retaliation. Harper's hand shook as she tried to steady her breathing. "We have to get them back, Andrew. We can't let him win." Andrew nodded. "Call the police again. This time they'll have no choice but to take action." Harper dialed the emergency line, her voice sharp and urgent as she reported the break-in and theft. The officers arrived quickly, but Grady was already gone. "Do you have proof that he's behind this?" the officer asked. "He's the only one who would do this," Harper snapped, anger boiling just beneath the surface. "He's threatened us. He's tried to scare us into silence." The officer sighed, jotting down notes. "We'll start a search, but you should also tighten security here. He's clearly escalating." As the police left, Harper sat on the office steps, her head in her hands. Tucker leaned against her, offering silent comfort. Andrew sat beside her, his voice low. "We'll find them, Harper, I promise." Harper lifted her head, determination blazing in her eyes. "This ends now. If the police won't stop him, then we'll find another way." The following morning, Harper and Andrew put out a public plea on social media, offering a reward for any information about the stolen dogs. The news station picked up the story, airing footage of the devastated shelter and the missing dogs. That afternoon, Harper received an anonymous tip. A shaky voice on the other end of the line whispered, "I know where he's keeping the dogs." Harper's pulse raced. "Where?" The caller gave her an address, a rundown property deep in the woods far from town. "You didn't hear it from me," the voice added before hanging up. Harper stared at the phone, adrenaline coursing through her veins. Andrew watched her carefully. "What is it?" "I know where they are," she said. "Grady's hideout." Andrew's eyes narrowed. "Harper, this could be dangerous." Harper shook her head. "I don't care. We have to save them." Andrew grabbed his keys. "Then let's go." Tucker barked, ready to follow them. Harper glanced down at him and smiled faintly. "All right, boy. You're coming with us." As they headed toward Grady's hideout, Harper gripped the steering wheel, her resolve unshakable. This was it, the final stand. Harper's truck rumbled down the dirt road leading into the woods, headlights slicing through the approaching dusk. Tucker sat in the back seat, his ears perked and eyes alert, as though he sensed the urgency of the mission. Andrew gripped the door handle, his face tense. "Are you sure about this place?" he asked, scanning the shadowy trees around them. Harper nodded, determination etched across her face. That call was real. I could hear it in their voice. "Grady's here, and so are those dogs. We can't wait for the authorities anymore." As they approached the clearing, a rundown property came into view. The dilapidated building was surrounded by a rusty wire fence, its sagging gate slightly ajar. From a distance, they could hear faint barking. Harper's heart leapt in her chest. "They're here," she whispered. Andrew exhaled sharply, pulling out his phone. "I'll call the police again and let them know where we are." Harper shook her head. "There's no time to wait. I'll go in first, check it out, and signal you if it's clear." "Harper, I'll be careful," she cut him off. "But those dogs need us." Before Andrew could argue further, Harper slipped out of the truck, Tucker following close behind. She crouched low as she approached the gate, slipping through the opening and into the property. The barking grew louder as she crept toward the main building, the weight of silence pressing heavily on her shoulders. Tucker moved like a shadow at her side, his nose twitching as he tracked the scent. Harper whispered softly to him, "Easy, boy. Stay close." As she rounded the corner of the building, Harper's eyes widened. There, in a makeshift pen covered with torn tarps, were the missing dogs, 2 golden retrievers, trembling and pressed against the far corner. Their eyes reflected fear, but also recognition as they spotted her. Harper's voice cracked with relief. "I see them," she whispered, glancing back toward the truck where Andrew waited. She waved her arm in a quick signal. Andrew gave her a thumbs up before disappearing back into the truck, likely making the call to the police. Carefully, Harper approached the pen, whispering softly to the dogs, "It's okay, babies, I'm here. We're going to get you out of this." Tucker wagged his tail slightly, staying calm so as not to frighten them further. As Harper reached for the latch, a voice suddenly sliced through the darkness. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Harper froze. Grady Walker stepped out of the shadows, his bulky frame illuminated by the faint glow of a flickering porch light. His face was twisted in anger, and in his hand he clutched a thick metal crowbar. Tucker growled low in his throat, stepping protectively in front of Harper. Harper straightened, refusing to back down. "Let these dogs go, Grady. It's over. The whole town knows what you've been doing. You can't get away with this." Grady let out a bitter laugh, taking a step closer. "You think you're going to stop me? You've got no right to be here." Harper held her ground, her heart pounding. "The police are on their way. You'll never hurt another animal again." Grady's expression darkened. "I've dealt with people like you before. You don't scare me." He raised the crowbar, taking another menacing step toward Harper. Suddenly, Tucker lunged forward with a ferocious bark, his sharp growl echoing through the clearing. Grady stumbled back, caught off guard, as the golden retrievers began barking wildly in unison. The noise was deafening, enough to momentarily rattle Grady. At that exact moment, Andrew burst onto the scene, shouting, "Harper! The police are here!" Red and blue lights flashed in the distance, sirens cutting through the tense standoff. Grady turned, realizing he was out of time. With a furious glare, he tossed the crowbar to the ground and bolted for the woods, disappearing into the shadows. "Coward!" Andrew shouted after him, his voice full of contempt. Harper wasted no time. She rushed to the pen and unlatched the gate. "Come here, sweethearts," she said gently, kneeling as the 2 retrievers cautiously approached. They wagged their tails faintly, their trust returning as Harper stroked their matted fur. Tucker sniffed them both, as if reassuring them that everything would be okay. Within minutes, the police cars screeched to a halt, officers jumping out with flashlights and radios crackling. Harper stood as they approached, pointing toward the woods. He ran that way. "Grady Walker, he's the one responsible for all of this." The officers split up, some chasing after Grady, while others examined the pen and checked the dogs. A senior officer turned to Harper with a look of quiet respect. You saved these dogs tonight. We'll make sure he doesn't hurt anyone else." Harper felt a wave of relief wash over her. She turned to Andrew, who was holding Tucker's leash with a proud grin. "We did it," she said softly. Andrew nodded. "Yeah, we did." The officers carefully loaded the 2 golden retrievers into their patrol car, assuring Harper they would be taken to safety. One officer handed Harper a blanket, which she draped around the trembling dogs. "You're safe now," she whispered. "You're going home." As the adrenaline began to fade, Harper knelt beside Tucker and hugged him tightly. "You're a hero, boy," she whispered into his fur. Tucker wagged his tail, as though he knew the part he'd played in saving the day. Andrew placed a hand on Harper's shoulder. "They'll be okay now. And Grady, he's finished." Harper smiled faintly, the weight of the past few days lifting from her shoulders. "Let's get back to the shelter. We've got a home waiting for them." The shelter was quiet when Harper and Andrew arrived later that night, the rescued dogs safe and sound in the back seat. Tucker, still alert, sat proudly by Harper's side, as if knowing he had just been part of something extraordinary. Harper glanced at the golden retrievers who had finally settled down, their eyes soft with trust and gratitude. "We're home now," she said gently as they parked in front of the shelter's warmly lit building. Andrew grabbed the leashes while Harper carried blankets and fresh food to prepare a welcoming space inside. The shelter Harper guided the 2 dogs into a cozy corner with soft bedding and water. They sniffed cautiously at the blankets before curling up together, their tails wagging faintly. Tucker sat close by, his presence calm and reassuring. Harper smiled softly, crouching to stroke their fur. "You're safe now," she whispered. "No more fear, no more hurt." Andrew stood nearby, watching the scene unfold with admiration. "You've got away with them, Harper," he said. "It's like they know they're finally home." Harper glanced up at him, a mixture of exhaustion and joy in her eyes. "It's not just me. It's Tucker, too. They trust him. He's been through so much himself, it's like he's telling them everything will be okay." Andrew knelt beside her, rubbing Tucker's head affectionately. "He's more than just a rescue dog. He's a hero." Suddenly, the sound of a car pulling into the shelter's lot broke the quiet. Harper frowned, exchanging a look with Andrew. Who could that be at this hour? They stepped outside, where a sleek black car had just parked. A tall, well-dressed woman emerged, her expression a mix of hope and hesitation. Harper and Andrew exchanged puzzled glances as the woman approached them. "Are you Harper?" the woman asked, her voice soft but confident. Harper nodded, brushing her hair back. "Yes. Can I help you?" The woman smiled faintly, her eyes misting with tears as she reached into her purse and pulled out a photograph. "I believe these dogs are mine," she said, holding the photo out for Harper to see. Harper stared at the picture in disbelief. It showed the 2 golden retrievers, healthy, happy, and playing in a sunlit backyard. "You know them?" Harper whispered. The woman nodded. "Their names are Bailey and Riley. They're my babies. They went missing weeks ago, and I've been searching for them ever since. Someone broke into my property and took them. I never thought I'd see them again." Harper's chest tightened as relief flooded through her. "They're here," she said, her voice trembling. "Safe and sound." The woman's composure broke as she let out a sob of gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Thank you for saving them." Harper guided her inside, where Bailey and Riley perked up immediately upon seeing their owner. The golden retrievers barked happily, their tails wagging furiously as they leaped toward her. The woman knelt to embrace them, tears streaming down her face as she murmured their names. "They missed you," Harper said softly, a lump forming in her throat. The woman looked up at Harper, her expression filled with gratitude. "I don't know how I can ever thank you for this. You didn't just save them, you saved me too." Harper smiled, wiping a tear from her own cheek. "They're home now, and that's all that matters." Andrew stood nearby, his arms crossed with a proud smile. You've given them a second chance, Harper. That's something no one can take away." The woman turned to Harper, pulling a business card from her purse. "I run an organization that helps rescue and rehabilitate abused animals," she explained. "We've been looking for people like you, people who put animals first no matter what. If you're interested, I'd love to partner with you and help your shelter grow." Harper blinked in surprise. "Are you serious?" "Absolutely," the woman said firmly. "The world needs more shelters like yours." Harper looked at Andrew, who grinned and gave her a thumbs up. "This is exactly what we've been working toward," he said. "It's finally happening." The woman knelt once more to hug Bailey and Riley before preparing to leave. "Thank you again," she said as she stood. "How you saved their lives." Harper watched her drive away, a sense of peace settling over her. Turning to Andrew and Tucker, she exhaled deeply. "We did it," she said. "They're safe, and we finally made a difference." Andrew grinned. "This is just the beginning, Harper. Your shelter's about to change everything." Harper knelt beside Tucker, wrapping her arms around him. "And we couldn't have done it without you, boy. You're a real hero." Tucker licked her face, his tail wagging as if he understood every word. That night, as Harper and Andrew closed the shelter, Harper looked back at the sleeping golden retrievers and the life they had saved. The shelter, though small, had become a place of healing, not just for the animals, but for everyone who walked through its doors. "Ready for the next challenge?" Andrew teased as they locked up. Harper smiled. "Always." Tucker barked softly, walking at her side as they headed home. And in that quiet, star-filled night, Harper knew she had found her purpose, a life dedicated to saving those who couldn't save themselves. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Join us for more inspiring tales of compassion, courage, and second chances. And remember, every small act of kindness can change a life. See you in the next story. Everything we've worked for will be for nothing. Andrew sighed. "You're brave, Harper, braver than most, but I don't want you to get hurt." The sincerity in his voice surprised her. For the first time, she noticed the shadows of worry etched into Andrew's face. "I'll be fine," she said softly. "As long as we're in this together, we'll figure it out." Andrew nodded, though his concern lingered. The morning of the Rescue Day event dawned bright and clear. The shelter's small parking lot had been transformed into a lively festival of tents, banners, and booths. Volunteers bustled about, setting up tables filled with adoption forms, pet supplies, and donation jars. Families began to arrive, children squealing with delight as they met the animals. Harper worked tirelessly, moving between booths, introducing puppies to potential adopters, and answering questions. Scout, now wearing a bright green bandana with "Adopt Me" embroidered on it, quickly became the star of the day. His playful demeanor and golden fur drew in a crowd wherever he went. "Look at this little guy," a young mother exclaimed, kneeling beside Scout as her daughter giggled and hugged him. "We might just have to bring him home." Harper beamed. "He'd make a wonderful addition to your family." The joy of the day was contagious, but Harper couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. She noticed a man standing at the edge of the crowd, his arms crossed and his gaze fixed on her. He wore sunglasses and a baseball cap, making it hard to see his face, but Harper's instincts prickled with unease. "Andrew," she whispered, pulling him aside, "do you see that guy by the fence?" Andrew glanced over and frowned. "Yeah, I don't recognize him." "Neither do I," Harper murmured. "He's been watching me." "Stay close to the volunteers," Andrew said firmly. "I'll keep an eye on him." The man lingered for another half-hour before disappearing into the crowd. Harper forced herself to focus on the event, reminding herself that Grady and his intimidation tactics wouldn't ruin what they'd built. By the end of the day, the shelter had raised more funds than Harper ever could have hoped for. 10 animals were adopted, including Scout, whose new family promised to give him a life full of love and happiness. As Harper hugged Scout goodbye, tears pricked her eyes, but they were tears of joy. "You're going to be so happy," she whispered to the pup as he licked her cheek. "You deserve this." Watching Scout leave with his new family, Harper felt a renewed sense of purpose. No matter what Grady tried, the shelter was making a difference. But as the sun set and the volunteers began packing up, Harper found a small envelope taped to the shelter's door. Her heart sank as she tore it open. Inside was a single note, scrawled in rough handwriting. "You think you've won? This isn't over." Harper's hands trembled as she read the words, but her jaw tightened with determination. Grady's threats were growing more dangerous, but she refused to let fear break her. The days after the Rescue Day event were bittersweet for Harper. Scout was thriving in his new home. His adoptive family had sent her pictures of the happy golden retriever running through their yard. But the note left on the shelter door lingered in her mind like a dark cloud. She couldn't let Grady win, but she also couldn't deny the danger was becoming real. Late one evening, as Harper sat in the shelter's small office sorting through adoption paperwork, Andrew knocked softly on the door frame, a cup of steaming tea in his hand. "Thought you could use this," he said with a small smile, handing her the mug. "Thanks," Harper replied, offering a grateful smile in return. She leaned back in her chair and sighed. "We should be celebrating, you know. The event was a huge success." Andrew pulled a chair over and sat across from her. "Yeah, but you've got that look again, like something's eating at you." Harper hesitated, then decided to be honest. "It's Grady. The note, everything he's doing. I feel like I'm walking on eggshells waiting for him to make his next move." Andrew's expression darkened. "He's a coward, Harper. He's trying to scare you because he knows he can't beat you any other way. But what if he escalates again?" Harper said, voicing her deepest fear. "What if it's not just notes or threats next time? What if he tries to hurt the animals or—" She trailed off, unable to finish the thought. Andrew leaned forward, his voice low but steady. "Then we'll stop him. We've already reported everything to the police, but I think it's time we do something more. Fight back in our own way." Harper furrowed her brows. "What do you mean?" "Expose him," Andrew said firmly. "We've talked about Grady's shady operation before, but we've never had solid proof. If we dig deeper and bring his actions to light, we can end this." Harper bit her lip. "You think we'll find something?" Andrew nodded. "I'd bet on it. People like Grady always slip up eventually." The idea gave Harper pause. Exposing Grady would put a target on her back even more than it already was. But Andrew was right. Letting him continue unchecked was no longer an option. "All right," she said finally. "Let's do it. But we have to be smart about this." Over the next few days, Harper and Andrew worked quietly behind the scenes, gathering information on Grady and his business. They started small, talking to other shelters, rescue groups, and even local pet owners. Stories began to emerge of suspicious injuries, sick animals sold under false pretenses, and payments that seemed to vanish without a trace. One evening, while researching online, Harper stumbled across a private forum where local animal rescue advocates shared warnings about unethical breeders. There, buried in a long thread, she found a name she recognized: Grady's Kennels. The posts were damning. One described a litter of puppies that had been sold with severe illnesses. Another recounted how a customer had discovered the rescued dogs they'd bought were actually stolen pets. Harper's stomach churned as she read. "Andrew," she said, waving him over to the computer screen. "Look at this. There's a pattern here." Andrew scanned the posts, his jaw tightening. "This is it. We need to bring this to the police and the local news." Harper hesitated. "What if he finds out it's us? We don't have enough yet to take him down completely." Andrew rested a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Then we'll keep looking until we do, Harper. The truth has a way of surfacing, but someone has to be brave enough to dig it out." Harper nodded, emboldened by his words. Tucker, who was curled up beside her feet, let out a soft bark, as if offering his own encouragement. That weekend, Harper decided to visit the outskirts of town where Grady's kennels were rumored to be located. She drove cautiously along the dirt road, her hands gripping the steering wheel as Tucker sat in the passenger seat, watching the world outside with quiet alertness. The kennels were tucked behind a chain-link fence, partially obscured by overgrown trees. From a distance, Harper could see rows of small, makeshift enclosures, some covered in tattered tarps. The faint sound of barking dogs reached her ears, and her heart ached at the thought of animals suffering under Grady's care. She parked a safe distance away and pulled out her phone, snapping a few photos through the zoom lens. As she focused on one of the enclosures, she spotted movement. A man stepping out of a small office building. Grady. Harper ducked lower in her seat, holding her breath as Grady scanned the area. For a moment she thought he might have seen her, but then he turned and walked back inside. Exhaling slowly, Harper whispered to Tucker, "We'll get them out of there, I promise." Back at the shelter, Harper shared the photos with Andrew and the team. "This has to be enough to get the authorities to investigate," she said, her voice resolute. Andrew studied the images and nodded. "It's a start. But we'll need more concrete evidence to make a case. We should share this with the rescue network. Maybe someone else has information we can add to this." Harper agreed, but as she glanced at the photos again, her phone buzzed with an unknown number. She hesitated before answering. "Hello?" A low, chilling voice crackled through the line. "You don't know when to quit, do you?" Harper froze, her blood running cold. "Who is this?" The voice ignored her question. "You think you're helping those dogs? You're just making things worse for yourself. Walk away now, or you'll regret it." The line went dead. Harper lowered the phone slowly, her hand shaking. Andrew, noticing her pale face, stepped closer. "Who was it?" "Grady," she whispered, "or one of his people." Andrew's expression hardened. "That's it. We're going to the police tonight. He's crossed the line." Harper looked toward the shelter, where Tucker and the other dogs lay peacefully, unaware of the growing storm. "We can't let him get away with this, Andrew. We have to stop him, for them." Andrew nodded. "And we will, together." The shelter felt unusually quiet that evening, the tension from the threatening phone call hanging in the air like a storm cloud. Harper sat at her desk, staring at the photos she had taken of Grady's kennels, her mind racing with worst-case scenarios. What if Grady followed through on his threats? What if he hurt the animals or tried to sabotage their shelter? Andrew entered the room holding 2 cups of coffee. "You need this," he said softly, placing one on the desk in front of her. "You look like you haven't blinked in an hour." Harper offered a weak smile. "I just keep thinking, Andrew, what if we're not doing enough? What if we can't stop him in time?" Andrew sat down across from her, his face serious but calm. "We are doing enough, Harper, and we'll keep fighting until this is over. You're not alone in this, okay? We've got the police involved, we've got photos, and more people are talking about Grady's operation." Harper nodded, but her unease wouldn't fade. Tucker, sensing her anxiety, padded over to her and rested his head on her lap. She stroked his soft fur, comforted by his presence. "It's just, he sounded so confident, Andrew, like he knows something we don't." Andrew's jaw tightened. "Then let's stay a step ahead of him." That night Harper couldn't sleep. She tossed and turned, Grady's warning replaying in her mind. Finally, around midnight, she sat up and sighed. Tucker, who had been curled at the foot of her bed, perked up and gave her a sleepy bark. "All right, buddy," Harper whispered. "Let's take a walk." Pulling on a jacket, she and Tucker stepped outside into the crisp night air. The shelter grounds were still and silent, illuminated by the faint glow of the moon. Harper tightened her scarf and let Tucker guide her toward the edge of the property. Walking always helped clear her head, and she hoped it would work this time. As they passed the storage shed, Tucker suddenly froze, his ears pricking up. He let out a low growl, his body tense. "What is it, boy?" Harper whispered, her heart pounding. She followed Tucker's gaze and spotted something movement in the shadows near the back fence. Her breath caught as she squinted into the darkness. A figure. Someone was there. "Hey!" Harper called, her voice sharper than she intended. The figure turned toward her for a split second, their face obscured by the night before they bolted, disappearing into the nearby woods. "Tucker, stay," Harper commanded as the dog barked furiously. She pulled out her phone, fumbling to dial Andrew's number. "Andrew," she said as soon as he picked up. "Someone's on the property. They ran off toward the woods." "Stay there. I'm on my way," Andrew replied, his voice alert. Harper stayed frozen in place, her eyes darting toward the shadows. Her heart raced as a terrifying thought crept in. Grady wasn't bluffing. He's here. Within minutes, Andrew arrived, flashlight in hand. "What happened?" he asked breathlessly. Harper quickly explained, pointing toward the spot where she'd seen the intruder. Andrew swept the area with the flashlight beam, but the person was long gone. He examined the fence and paused, his brow furrowed. "Harper," he said gravely, pointing to a section of the fence. It had been cut. She felt her stomach drop. "Oh no, they're trying to get in." Andrew muttered, "We need to lock everything down. Double-check the dogs, the locks, everything." Together they rushed back to the shelter. Andrew checked the perimeter while Harper inspected each kennel, counting the dogs and ensuring all doors were secure. Tucker followed her closely, his growls low and protective. Finally, after what felt like hours, Andrew returned. "No one's here now, but we need to call the police again. This wasn't just a scare. He's testing us." Harper nodded, her hands shaking slightly as she stroked Tucker. "And what happens if we fail that test?" Andrew crouched beside her. "We won't. We're stronger than him, Harper. And we've got something he doesn't. People who care about what's right." The police arrived shortly after, inspecting the damaged fence and taking Harper's statement. An officer reassured her they would patrol the area for the next few nights, but the encounter had rattled her deeply. As the officers drove away, Andrew turned to her. "You should get some sleep," he said. Harper shook her head. "I can't. I won't leave the shelter tonight." "Then neither will I," Andrew said firmly. Together, they set up makeshift cots in the shelter's office. Tucker curled up between them, a steadfast guardian in the dark. As Harper lay there, staring at the ceiling, her resolve hardened. Grady had tried to intimidate her, to make her feel powerless. But he had underestimated her. "We're going to stop him, Andrew," she whispered in the darkness. Andrew's voice was quiet but resolute. "We will." The next morning, Harper arrived at the shelter's front door to find an envelope taped to the handle. Her heart pounded as she tore it open, revealing a chilling message scrawled in bold black ink. "Back off. This isn't over." Harper clenched the note in her fist, her expression hardening. Tucker barked at her side, sensing her anger. Andrew stepped beside her, reading the note over her shoulder. "That's it," he said. "I'm done playing his games. It's time we take this public." Harper looked at him, determination blazing in her eyes. "Let's end this." The note in Harper's hand felt heavier than paper as the words echoed in her mind. "Back off. This isn't over." The time for quiet measures had passed. She turned to Andrew, her voice firm with conviction. "We're not backing down," she said. "We're taking this public. People need to know what Grady's been doing, and they need to know now." Andrew nodded. "I'll get the press involved. Between the photos we've taken, the evidence of neglect, and this intimidation, the public will rally behind us. Grady won't be able to hide anymore." Harper moved swiftly, contacting local animal rescue groups and community leaders. She explained the situation with the rogue kennel and shared photos of Grady's abuse. The response was immediate. Outrage and support flooded in. Within hours, local animal welfare pages on social media began posting Grady's name, detailing the horrors uncovered at his property. Harper's phone buzzed constantly as volunteers and supporters pledged their help. The next day, Harper stood in front of a small crowd of reporters and volunteers outside the shelter. her hands trembling slightly, but Tucker sat by her side, his calm presence giving her strength. Cameras were pointed at her, and microphones hovered close. She took a steadying breath before speaking. "My name is Harper, and I run this shelter to save and protect animals in need. But what we've discovered over the past few days has been devastating. There's a man in this community, Grady Walker, who runs an illegal kennel where dogs are kept in horrific conditions. We've seen the abuse with our own eyes, and we have the evidence to prove it." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, but Harper pressed on. "This man has tried to silence us.